Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Hello and welcome to the Impact Farming Show. Today, I have an amazing guest. I have Joe Roberts joining us. Joe, how are you?
I'm doing really great. Thanks for having me on the program.
I am so excited to have Joe on the show. You guys are in for a treat. And so much so, he has such a compelling story that I want to give you guys a little bit of an introduction before we roll in. So I didn't want to miss any of the good stuff. So here we go. Today's guest, Joe, has an honorary doctorate from Laurentian University. He's the winner of the Courage to Come Back Award, was recently awarded the Meritorious Service Medal from the Governor General of Canada. But guys, Joe's life hasn't always been this good. In fact, 25 years ago, he pushed a shopping cart in Vancouver's downtown east side as a homeless addict. Joe's story that he's going to share with us today is one of perseverance, determination, resiliency of the human spirit. He is truly a living testament to the idea that anything is possible. So once again, guys, I am pleased to welcome the Skid Row CEO, Joe Roberts. Are you ready to roll, Joe?
I'm ready. Yeah, born ready.
Excellent. Good. So I gave the audience a little bit of a teaser to who you are, but you have such a compelling, interesting, moving story. Why don't we dive in and get you to share about your journey?
Yeah, sure. The one thing I would say is just to add to the bio is that it sounds like I'm sort of all that in a bag of chips, and I'm really not. I'm just a guy who's put a little bit of life experience behind me, and I'm here today because of over 10,000 people. When I was vulnerable and I was in my worst way, it was the support of people and community that really helped nurse me back to health. And I think that's important, especially in the context of mental health and the conversation we're having as we sort of move out of COVID, because I think it's impacted us a lot in the same ways. In fact, when COVID hit, I found myself in very familiar territory. For years, I lived in, a sub-poverty level. I lived in a place that was filled with threat. I lived in a place where I didn't have access to resources. Community and relationships were impeded. I went to bed with fear and worry and woke up with problems that didn't have solutions. And in the midst of all that, I wasn't really good as a man asking for help, and I didn't always make the right choices. And so hence substance abuse to deal with the emotional uncertainty. So when COVID hit, I was like, wow, this really feels similar to me. I've been through that, Now, I didn't start in the downtown east side. It's like when you see someone today and they're struggling, one of the things I always tell audiences is ask the question, if you do nothing else, just ask the question, what happened before that happened?
Amen. Yep.
Yeah, it's an empathic question because, but for the grace go I. Not all childhoods are created equal. Not all homes are created equal. Economically, spiritually, emotionally, we don't all get the same toolkits growing up. And so when life lifes us, not every 14, 15-year-old knows how to necessarily navigate some of those big things. And that's really my story. And it's a story, unfortunately, is all too common across Canada, the United States, and in the developed world. I came from a small community, probably not as small as some of the listeners. I know that, not like a crossroads community where, there's a general store and a mailbox, but the town was, 5,000 people. I grew up in Midland.
Small.
It's about an hour north of Toronto. Okay. And, for the first 8 years of my life, it was perfect. I had this incredibly supportive father. He believed in discipline. So, I was raised right. And we believed in corporal punishment too, which is, boy, that's changed a lot. But I knew where I stood. And my father was the kind of man who said things like, I love you, you can do and be anything. He spoke to my potential, my possibility. In his shadow, I felt safe. I felt my potential, and I felt loved and protected, you know. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. It's not that she couldn't have had a career. She just wanted to raise her children. And so we lived in a little house beside the water tower in Midland, Ontario. And for the first 8 years, everything was great. Unfortunately, life does. And one day, Dad was taken from us really early in his life. And just like that, overnight, we faced economic insecurity. Mom didn't have a full-time job. Dad wasn't properly insured. It was just like boom, 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 everything all at once.
Wow.
And yeah, it really impacted. I had an older sister and a younger, or an older brother and a younger sister, and so it impacted all of us. But it also, like, I can't imagine how tough that was for my mom, because Dad was a breadwinner. You know, we had sort of this traditional lower middle class family. We didn't have a lot, but what we had family, we had security, we had the little house, but all of that sort of disappeared overnight. And now Mom's facing, you know, being a single mom, raising 3 kids on her own, no income. I can't imagine how scary that must have been for her.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a dad today, and I can earn. So, but if that was taken away and I lost my wife, that would be like just brutal, devastating. So what happened was Mom remarried relatively quickly, and I don't fault her for that. Given the context of the early 1970s, that made sense, right? I don't think it was any disrespect to my father whatsoever. Unfortunately, the man who came into the home next wasn't anything like Dad. He was a violent, abusive alcoholic.
Aw.
And so, yeah, I went from a man who would say things like, I love you, you can be anything, to a man who would say things like, you're stupid, you're dumb, you'll never amount to anything.
Aw. Terrible.
Well, and when I share that today, I don't share it from a place of being a victim. That's really important. And I've forgiven him a long time ago. But as a little boy, I really didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
I believed it. You know, it's like, you know, a thing I've often said in my advocacy for youth that are vulnerable is that if you can get a child to believe a lie about who they are, you can predict some of their poor choices later on in life. And you can limit how they see and operate in the world around them.
Yeah.
At 9 years old, my big brother and his friends were experimenting with drugs and asked me to join, and I joined. And I didn't join because I was curious about doing drugs. I joined because I wanted to fit in. And I got high for the first time, and I knew it was wrong. I mean, I was raised well, you know. I knew what I was doing wasn't right, but I wanted to fit in. And so I got high, and I went home under the influence for the first time in my life. And my stepfather came home from a day of drinking at the Legion, and he comes storming into the house. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't scared of him. And so it was like, wow. For the first time since, you know, Dad passed away, I felt protected. I felt okay, despite all the chaos in my life. So you can imagine that's a place that I sort of went to, you know, for the next 15 years of my life. In the beginning, alcohol and drugs gave me emotional protection from an uncertain world. Now, you know what's really interesting is my observation from that life experience to see what's happened during COVID and what's happened to different people dealing with unresolved grief or challenges in their businesses, or just the uncertainty of the farming community and what it means to be a farmer today. Now, I don't know anything about that because that's certainly not my background, but I could think that it's really easy to turn a corner and deal with so much challenge and change and adversity. And I've noticed the last 2 years, there's been a spike in people consuming more alcohol, consuming more recreational drugs, experiencing depression and anxiety and mental health challenges. And that makes sense because people's uncertainty has been rocked. There's just so much going on in the world today with divisive politics and the mandates and the closures and, just the economic uncertainty.
Absolutely.
It's so normal and natural for people to reach for something to medicate in some way, shape, or form, whether that's scrolling social media or, eating more pizza than you did the year before. Right?
Well, Joe, I want to jump in. Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
On our show here, we do business. That's kind of the core of the show. But I have found that I cover a lot of mental health because farming in itself has so many variables out of our control. I kind of see the similarities in your story. Those drugs, you grab them, they made you feel good. They numbed the pain. They gave you control. They made you feel better, stronger. But to me, even since COVID has hit, I've gone deeper into the mental health on the show because, when crazy things are happening on the farm, weather, whatever it is, but you have a pretty stable life. Everything's tickety-boo. The family's good. The kids are good. There's no COVID, right? There's no pandemic out there. When life is normal, you can deal with those things, but we've all been rocked, exactly like you said. Everybody's can of worms, whatever that might be, has been open. So anyways, I just wanted to pop that in there. I could see your similarities, and that's why I wanted to have you on the show, because your story is perfect for our audience that's dealing with, can of worms, what to do on top of an already stressful lifestyle, right? Sorry, continue on.
No, that's perfect. And in fact, I deliver a workshop right now on stress and burnout. It's called Energy Health Management. It's basically a suite of self-care tools. And I've been teaching this to businesses and people in all different sectors. And in fact, I spoke at the Saskatchewan Safety Council recently and intertwined some of that into my story. I think my observational point is that there are 5 energy drains in our lives, and 3 of them don't normally come into play until COVID. So typically work is mentally and physically draining. Mm-hmm. Whether you're actually doing a lot of physical work or not, sitting at a chair in front of a computer is physically draining, right? Or if you're out, on a tractor. But what didn't draw a lot of energy before was social connection and disconnection, emotional connection and disconnection, and the environment that we live and work in. See, all 3 of those combined with the other 2 began to really rob us of a lot of energy and have left us. And most people, I would say like 8 to 9 out of 10, when I do the questionnaire, are you feeling this? Have you got this, and this going on? This, and this? Everyone raises their hand. And I think it's because there's been there's just so many more energy demands in our life that were not there 2 years ago. Absolutely. That's why I say that there was parallels between being homeless and COVID, because when you don't have to fight every night for shelter or food or support a drug dependency or deal with safety under the bridge or wherever you're camping, when you have all of those additional stressors in your life, wears you down fast. And I think that's the similarity of what's happened, is that so many things have come at us and they've worn us down. And here's the other thing: when stress goes up in our life, the things that we do to unwind and recover go down. Okay. So we're not grabbing the fishing rod and going out and catching trout. We're not spending time, hanging out with our neighbor, having a beer in his shed, fixing his car. You're not taking the kids camping because you've got to work late hours. You're burning your vacation. You're working from home. You don't have boundaries. You've got the kids at your feet. All of these things have combined to leave us even more depleted. So it's not just that the stress and energy goes up. It's that our ability to recharge has gone down. And then what you've got in between is this massive energy gap.
Well, and you hit the nail on the head too. The very nature of this pandemic and what they have asked us to do, isolate, not talk, not go out, not associate. Everything you just said that provides us joy and health has been robbed. So, you are so right. Our stress has just skyrocketed. And anything that we would rely on or fall back on, friends, family, community, sports, to have an outlet or kinship or whatever you want to call it, has been cut off. That's a perfect storm.
It's been interrupted. And then because of the other energy demands, are scrambling to keep up with work and not looking for creative ways to work around the challenges. Instead, we'll just won't do it. So an example, the gym closes. If you're someone who's an avid gym goer, okay, well, the gym closes now, you don't work out. Well, no, there are other things that you could do, but you've got to get creative. Maybe you need some accountability. Like what can you do to replace that interruption? Yes. And so folks who have found creative ways to keep those things in their life have fared better over the last 2 years than those who have those things have fallen away. The good news is that, we're moving back to a place where things are sort of reopening again. It'll be easier for us to get some of those things back in our life because we need them.
Yes.
As social creatures, we need connection with other human beings. All right. We need ways to emotionally decompress, to mentally decompress, especially when, let's face it, it's not going to get better, but we can. And when we take responsibility for our self-care, we can shift that needle really, really quickly. And that's sort of the story on my upswing is that, as a teenager, so 8, 9, experimenting with drugs. At 15, I was angry, coming out sideways. That I got kicked out of the house because I couldn't get along with my stepfather anymore. I had no respect for him. And rightly so. I shouldn't have been under his roof because I was rebellious and, I was insufferable, And so at 15 years old, I was on my own. But at 15, I didn't have any role models or people to teach me.
Yeah.
And so I fell into that crowd, into that group. At 16, I dropped out of school, which is an incredibly foolish thing to do. And at 17, I was involved in the criminal justice system. So it all happened like really fast. And I wasn't a bad kid. I was just making dumb choices.
But, Joe, listening to your story, I'm going, of course, a young man with such a strong foundations hit with the death of the father. This guy comes in, Can we expect otherwise? Right?
Well, you could if there was some things in place, and that's when later on we'll get into sort of some of the advocacy work that I do. But if you've got proper stopgaps in place, think of it as safety, like safety in the workplace. There's certain things in high risk environments that are there for a reason, to protect against falls, to protect against our eyes, our PPE, to protect against electrical shock. Right. Well, we need to think about how we can do that to better protect the kids who are vulnerable. I had 2 serious traumas. I lost dad, did not do well with the grief, right? And that's, I think, one of the big things that we're going to come out of the pandemic with. There's a lot of people who had to rush through and do unorthodox processes in saying goodbye to loved ones, whether it was COVID or other. Yeah. I mean, 2 years, a lot of people are not here anymore. Yeah. And I want to be sensitive to this because there's people listening who, that could have been yesterday for them. Mm-hmm. For me, I didn't deal with the grief. We didn't talk about grief. I was a typical guy brought up in the mindset of, big boys don't cry. And I wasn't really good at sharing my feelings, and I didn't have anybody to talk to, and I didn't have a good role model to replace dad. And so I just kind of stuffed it all down. That combined with the physical and emotional trauma of my stepfather was sort of a 1-2 whammy.
Yeah.
Right. Today, I recognize that I don't want to live in the illusion of self-sufficiency anymore when I need help. And I think one of the strongest things a person can do is put their hand up and ask for help and allow somebody to walk alongside them. May not be for a long time, but just to share the load. And whether that's working with someone professionally, or that's a support group, or just someone that you can sort of unpack and deal with some of that emotional and mental stuff that you're carrying. And some of that can happen in our social group, in our faith-based groups, in our camaraderie in the workplace, and even sometimes with our boss, depending on those relationships. But yeah, I didn't have that. And so I was sort of hurling off a cliff. And at 19, I bought a one-way ticket across Canada. I left Central Ontario and I decided to come out to Vancouver. It was 1986 and Expo was on. And, you know, like so many kids that leave a small town and head to a big city, I had no idea what was waiting for me in Vancouver. I just wanted out. I wanted out of the small town where I was well known for being, you know, a crap disturber, if you will.
Fresh start, right?
Yeah, that's all I wanted was a fresh start.
Yeah.
And I headed west. In fact, when you look at the demographics across the country, that's why you see so many kids leave small communities and end up on the streets of Regina or Saskatoon or Calgary or Edmonton or Thunder Bay or Winnipeg, because there's so much outlying country and small towns. When they leave, where are they going to go? To the next small town? No, they're going to go to the big city.
Yes, that makes
sense.
sense.
And I got off that bus in Vancouver. It was Expo 86 was on, and I remember I had this overwhelming feeling of aspiration. You know, it was like the opening credits to the Mary Tyler Moore show, you know, where she takes her hat and she throws it in the air. I realize if you're under 30, you have no idea what I just said, right?
Well, clearly don't understand then, Joe. 29 and holding.
Yeah.
Right.
But I had this wonderful feeling like Vancouver was going to be my town and I was going to get that fresh start and I was going to get a job and everything was going to turn around. But the problem is I packed all my baggage with me. And so finally where I had that little moment of aspiration in a park just down from the Greyhound station across the street from Sandman Inn on Georgia, I ended up calling that place home.
Okay.
About 3 weeks later. And then over the next several years, my life degraded to the point where I was actually living under that bridge.
Wow.
And so back in the late 80s, I was that disheveled kind of guy with matted hair, you know, layers of old coats, and I collected cans and bottles in the downtown core. And if you looked at me, it would have been easy to write me off. My potential wasn't showing itself at that time. But I think the interesting thing from a leadership perspective or a business perspective to take out of this, and this is one of the things I always hammer on when I deliver when I do keynotes and workshops, is that inside me at that time, even though it was hard to see, was a possibility. And that's really what we want to focus on. When we go through crisis, it's hard for us to think innovatively. It's hard for us to see past the problems and challenges. Yes. Because the outward roadblocks create inward roadblocks. And the next thing you know, we're just wrapped in this vicious cycle of stinking thinking. It's difficult for us to break that. And when we get stuck into that process in our brains, we're not actually able to engage a possibility other than what's in front of us. And so it's like we get into this sort of groundhog modality of living where yesterday or today looks just like yesterday. Yeah. And we do that because we are pattern seekers as human beings. We're really good at seeing patterns.
Yeah.
Pattern identification is important for our survival. However, there's no room for change in recognizing pattern. You're just trying to predict what's going to happen next.
Yes.
Great innovators, change makers, parents, coaches, they're the people who see something different in the world and then work to draw it out of you or work to draw it out of the world. If you look at the people we admire the most, Terry Fox, Nelson Mandela, Dr. Martin Luther King, these were people who stood for something other than what was the status quo at the time and led people towards it. Possibility is what put us on the moon. Possibility is what put us into modern aviation. the combustion engine, the cell phone, and it's behind every disruptive technology in the last 10 years, because these kids that are upsetting and burning and smashing everything down in Silicon Valley are looking at the world and saying, what can we break and make better? That's possibility. And so inside me pushing that shopping cart was a possibility of transformation.
Preach,
so,
brother. Preach.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that I found in all of that despair and degradation and hopelessness, is that regardless of how life lifes you, that at any given moment, you can transform. There will never be a moment in your life where you cannot change the way you think and the next action you take.
Love it. Okay. I want to build off that. Our audience here, we got to keep in mind that people are lifing, like you said, and we have people watching this show on all spectrums. To set the stage for some of the people in our audience, there has been a few really challenging years in farming due to drought, lack of moisture, and then grasshopper infestations. Some have had bumper crops, but for a large majority of the people in our audience, we have been hit by so much, not only the weather and issues with the crop, but now we're talking about economic uncertainty. Our prices are being doubled. So Joe, why I wanted to have you on, because this is a great message. There are some people, and let's hope we're moving out of it, but I do have concerns for our industry here, agriculture. Not only are we doing, like I said, the stress of agriculture, a very stressful profession, we've added the pandemic on. So I could see people, we're at home, we're isolated. We had a terrible year. There's financial stress. We're spinning. This might not even be the first bad year. Many farmers in Western Manitoba have had 3 years of dry. So they're spinning. And like you said, we're pattern seekers. We wake up, we have the same problem. We ruminate on it. So we get stuck in that because that's nature and that's our situation. So that's why I wanted to bring you on, because you have such a powerful message. So is this a good time for us to pivot to your moment where you had a moment of change? And for you, it was a person, I believe. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. So just before Christmas, 1989, I was sitting in Pigeon Park, which is sort of the epicenter of downtown East Side Vancouver. And I was sitting beside this guy, and his name was Gus. And I only got to know him because he was waiting for the number 10 Fraser bus. And he was this beautiful older man. And I have to be honest, at that time in my life, I was a pretty selfish person. And the only reason I sat down beside him is, I was panhandling, and he had cigarettes. So I asked him for a cigarette, and he was kind. He gave me one, and he gave me a couple dollars, but he gave me something bigger. He looked at me and he said, Joe, he got to know my name. He says, Joe, he says, you've got this addiction, homeless thing going on, but if you could, if you really applied yourself and took responsibility for your life, you could go out and do something extraordinary with your life. And he looked at me and he said, there's more to you than you can see.
Wow.
And this was the first time someone other than my mom or dad spoke to my potential. Now, I run all kinds of different workshops. One of the ones I've done in the past is I'll get people to write down the 5 people that have really influenced them. And sometimes it's mom and dad, sometimes it's grandpa, sometimes it's, a mentor, a coach, teacher. But then the next question usually stumps people. It's like, whose list do you think you're on?
Ooh.
Right? Because we have the power to impact, other people. But where it all started for me was this idea that maybe there's more to me. Now, I don't want to be trite. When you're talking about people going through, years of adversity, challenge, and change, I don't want to just slap a bumper sticker up here and say, do this. No. What I will say is that when we change our actions, focused on a better possibility, share that in community with other people where we've got accountability and emotional support, we can transcend anything. And I know that sounds simplistic, and yeah,
Well,
and it's difficult. It's difficult because I don't know. Like if I had somebody sitting in front of me and they say like this, and this, that's where you would go in sort of this coaching mode and say,
yeah,
what can you do today?
yes.
You know, I was listening this morning to some Stoic philosophy about seizing today. You know, about they use this idea of memento mori, which is the acknowledgement of death. Well, every day we die a day, but do we live every day? Do we take the opportunities we can today to take the actions to change the outcomes of tomorrow and the next day? A lot of times when we get caught up in stuff, we get out of action because of fear and anxiety and depression. And we don't do things that are helpful for us to change the circumstances. That was my life for a decade.
Well, and that's my next point. You know what? Fortunate, many of us in the audience, we get stuck in that wait. Okay, tomorrow is going to be better. Well, how's it going to be better? Unless we affect it or something else does. You had a person that came and then spoke life into you, so to speak. And that was a moment for you that sparked it. Unfortunately, fortunately, most of us don't have those moments, right? Sometimes it's illness. Sometimes it's a near death. Sometimes it's a person that comes by or a situation. But very often it's not. And if we don't be the change ourselves, I want you to speak to this. Most of us need to change our actions to change our results. So if we don't have that thing that comes into our life and changes our mind for us, how does a person get out of that? Let's think of a farmer that's at home and gosh, things are challenging and we spin and we spin and we spin. That might be a larger percentage of the audience. Nobody's coming to knock them or pat them on the shoulder and say, hey, this is how you change your life. Can you speak to that?
Sure. Well, I would say what Gus in that park bench represented was a spark, an idea.
Yeah. Had
I done nothing with it, I likely wouldn't have made it past even the early 90s. I would have been a statistic, unfortunately, as so many are. What I did next was, I got connected to community of people who had my best interest in mind. I set some goals and I began to move forward. Now, it's been a long time since those early days, but I've had the pleasure to work with a gentleman named Dr. Sean Richardson, and we actually developed a very, very simple model for creating change in one's life. And what I love about it is its simplicity on the other side of complexity.
Nice.
So here's what it looks like. We need to manage three things. Okay. We need to manage the actions we take, the reasons that drive those actions, and then acknowledge the roadblocks that get in our way of achieving our respective goals or possibilities. And those roadblocks come in two forms, situationally and psychologically. And sometimes those two things impact each other. So government mandates can impact us internally, or our internally can impact the people that we lead, right? So these play against each other. So the possibility mindset, and possibility is just, it's a nice word for innovation, or it could be a word for goal setting or a different outcome. What could my farm, my practice, my business look like a year from now, 2 years from now? All right. And this to really begin to marinate on possibility. From there, an action plan gets developed. And then we basically just need to manage three things: the actions we take, the reasons why we take them, and the predictable roadblocks that are going to get in our way.
Clever.
So why I'm passionate about this is I've used this model to do some extraordinarily difficult things. So it's not like we just made this up on a whiteboard in our garage and thought, oh, that sounds good. Sean is a sports psychologist, he's a former Olympic athlete, and he did his PhD on high performance. And so this is how you become the best in the world, but it's also how you rebound from injury.
Okay.
This is the same model that, an athlete who gets a torn Achilles at the beginning of the season can still come back and, play in the playoffs. And and I say it's simplicity, because all I need to manage on any given day is what actions am I going to take? Why am I going to take them? And what are the things that are going to get in my way? But also a clear understanding of what that possibility is. When we take action in the face of negative emotion or that noise in our heads, we change our emotional climate. Mm-hmm. If we take no action, the fear, anxiety, and ruminating grows and grows and grows.
Yes.
And so sometimes it's as simple as when someone's stuck and they've got a lot of these things sort of dancing around their head, get it out on paper first, and then start playing with some different possibilities. But if you're really stuck, it's also worth doing that exercise with someone else who has a different perspective that'll challenge you on the way you're seeing the world.
Yes.
A lot of times when I sit down and have a coffee with somebody, they'll tell me how the world is according to their perspective.
Right.
I don't see it like that. Yep. And I'll say, well, wait a minute. What about this? What about this? What about? And I can have a 20-minute coffee with somebody and they'll go, it's not to say that everything's going to just melt away. But when we change how we see the world changes.
I just heard a quote and I actually printed it off. I have to jump in there, Joe, because this one changed my life. I'm a quote person. Such small little words on a little image has changed my life, literally. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. So if we're stuck in our mind on our problem, that's all we see, because unless new knowledge comes in, right, we see it this way. And meanwhile, there's 20 options out here. That quote, and that's, I think, exactly what you're saying, just like that conversation you had, right? You went to the guy and said this.
What you just that quote exemplifies possibility versus probability.
Okay.
Right? Probability is it's when we shift, and it's a subtle thing. But when we do that, all of a sudden, like, how did I go from a guy who scuffled and lived behind a dumpster, to getting an opportunity to go to treatment, going back to college, graduating with honors, and in less than 12 years, being a celebrated Canadian entrepreneur?
Yeah.
I was at one of the worst places you can be at in the Western world. So when I talk about this stuff, I talk with a high level of conviction, because I've met so many champions over the years that have come from absolutely impossible backgrounds, or have come back from impossible challenges or adversity in their life to now be in an extraordinarily different place. And the secret is, there is no secret. The secret is to keep your feet moving.
Yes. Yes.
I cannot expect to have a harvest in the fall if I don't plant the seed in the spring.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee that even if I plant the seed, I'm going to get a harvest, because a lot has to happen in between.
Yeah.
But if I don't, I can be guaranteed to have nothing. Right? There's a great book right now. One of the best books I read last year it's by James Clear. It's called Atomic Habits.
Ooh, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's really good. And one of the things that James points out in the book, he says, we vote for who we want to be tomorrow with our actions today.
Ooh, powerful.
Right. So if we're stuck in the loop of it's always going to be like that, it's always going to be like that, it's always going to be like I'm screwed and it's not going to work for me, and that is the subconscious soundtrack in your life, I guarantee you that will attract more of the same.
I've gone through that. All my
But
career.
if you change the way you think and change just some small actions, all of a sudden something begins to be different. And again, I don't want to sound trite because, that's not going to change the weather systems, or it's not going to change the drought, or it's not going to change the way the government operates or foreign markets. But But even though we can't control what goes on around us, we can control how we interpret it. And that is really, it makes all of the difference. Right?
Can I throw something at you? Knowing our audience, I'm a farmer as well. I'm an entrepreneur. And sometimes I get stuck in that little circuit, right? And then you get paralyzed. And especially since COVID, it's natural.
Yeah.
Whoever you are. Some of the things, and so easy to me, it's always you need something to stimulate you. And for me, I often watch YouTube videos, some self-help stuff, read a book. I see you have your book in the background. Taking in a different idea automatically changes who you are. So for me, what I've used is books, videos, podcasts for people in our audience, and drawing on what other guests have said, like farm business consultants, talking to a debt mediator if it's that bad on the farm, because you're just going to spin and nothing will solve, and it'll probably get worse. So just take the step, rip the Band-Aid off, get a plan. For the mental health, talk to somebody, right? Because
talk to somebody, go for a walk. Sometimes it's really, really small stuff, but yeah. If you find yourself and it's just sort of the same old, and it's just the tape playing in your head, one of the things when I get into that is I know I have to do something different. We do not feel our way into better behavior. We behave our way into a better feeling.
Yeah, totally. So love it.
You've literally got to get up off that park bench. I literally had to get up off that bench and take a couple steps forward. Those getting up off that bench and taking a couple steps forward is what began all of the incredible things that are in my life today.
I love it.
But had I not gotten off the bench and taken a couple of steps forward, I wouldn't have become inspired. I wouldn't have become motivated. I wouldn't have learned these things about myself. I wouldn't have learned that, oh, wow, all of those things that happened actually were good things, because now they're assets. It would still be happening to me.
Yeah, that's powerful. Okay, so we talked about being the change. We chatted about some action steps, and I think we covered that nicely. Unless you want to add further on that, I have a burning question I want to ask you. Did you want to add anything to what we were talking about before I?
Well, I think there's something in here too, is that when you're stuck, and this is something that I've found along the journey, and it's also a big part of my life today, is giving back. A lot of times when I am in my worst, I'll stop and go and help somebody. And even though I don't have the time and other resources, we are our most beautiful when we're helping other human beings. And I think that's one of the big things that have gotten banged up over the last 2 years, is that the agrarian culture going back thousands of years is about community and helping your neighbor, and about that connectedness, right? Once I achieved the success that I did, I wanted to do something to pay it forward. And so in 2016 and 17, I walked 9,000 kilometers across Canada, pushing a symbol of chronic homelessness, which is a shopping cart. And what I learned along the way, it's funny, it took me getting into my late 40s and 50s to figure some of these things out, is that when I'm in service to others, whether that's my family or with the community or my neighbor, things start to look differently. And so I want to be involved today in things that help and support others. And I think it's one way to quickly get outside of ourselves. The other thing that it taught me is that at 49 years old, as a non-athlete, I'm talking about, I got picked last for every team my entire life, right? I managed to push a shopping cart 9,000 kilometers across Canada.
Wow.
And we raised a couple $1 million, and I had some really spectacular days. And we crossed into Ontario. I got to walk with Walter Gretzky. And I share this story because it's an example of how we were in, it took 4 years to build this campaign just to get to the point where I could even begin walking from Newfoundland.
Wow.
And the challenges that we faced, and the hardships we had to go through, and the letdowns, and things that just were working and then stopped working. But every single time we remembered, why are we doing this? What do we have to do next? What's in our way?
Yeah.
And so that model, played such an important role. And again, it's another reason why I have conviction in that, create that possibility that you can imagine in your mind, visualize it, see it, taste it, smell it, and then do something today, right now, to get you closer to it, even if it's just writing down 4 goals.
Preach, brother. That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
So that was very impactful. And I'm going to ask you a special question that I am dying to know. And I hope you didn't just take it, because what you said was pretty amazing right there. So let's play a game here. You're on an island, and let's say you're at the ripe old age of 130. That's what we live to in this scenario. You're on an island, you're by yourself, you have a tiny piece of paper and you have a pen with not much ink. You can only leave one fundamental truth that you hold most dear. And this is what's going to be passed on as your words of wisdom. No pressure. What is that fundamental truth to you that you want to leave with our audience?
You're not who you think you are.
Oh, do tell.
I'd write it like that, because then people would have to really think about it.
You caught me off guard.
Yeah, because we aren't. We live our lives in this illusion of self, and that we think we're these little avatars running around, with our sense of identity and self. And we're connected to something so much bigger. And our job is to radiate that so much bigger thing in this tiny, minuscule time that we have on this planet. And we are not what we think we are. We're so much more. It's a version of what Gus gave me on the park bench. Right? You're not who you think you are.
That is powerful. Wow. I'm getting goosebumps and thinking, I'm like, okay, who am I then? I'm going to ponder this after we get off the episode here. That's amazing, Joe. Wow. I think those are wonderful words of wisdom, fundamental truth. I'm going to do one last call out to you. You've shared so much, such a powerful message with your story, just sharing your rags to riches and what you went through and the story of anything possible. I want to get you to do one last, we did the fundamental truth, and that's powerful. I want to get you to share final words of wisdom for anybody in our audience that might be stuck going through a hard time. I'll leave this to you to do some parting words with our audience.
I think the one thing I always try to do is get people to do something, even if it's just small. There's a principle called Kaizen, which is a Japanese philosophy of small incremental improvement.
Ooh.
We don't create change through large innovative leaps. We do it through small moments, small actions. Sobriety doesn't happen 10 years at a time. It happens an hour at a time and a day at a time. Walking across Canada takes a step at a time. Becoming a successful, you earn $1 at a time. And so whatever direction you can imagine yourself being in a year or two from now, take some positive action today, because today will be dead. It will be behind you, and the opportunities to produce something today will have passed. But if you take action today, you can create any possibility that you want in your life, an action at a time.
Lovely. I am so thankful in the world. I know you've impacted so many lives with your speaking and sharing your message. I'm so happy that you took the spark that Gus gave you and allowed it to light your internal fire, because what a message of hope for anyone. So That's amazing, Joe. I have goosebumps from our time together. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your message with our audience. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah. In 2003, I left the business that I built because I wanted to do something that had more meaning and purpose for me. And this is it. I wake up every single morning looking for people to encourage, looking for people where life is beating them down. And just to tell them, look, if I can do it, you can do it. If I can go from being a skid row junkie, with just a track record of failure and turn that into something, I know I'm not special. I'm not. I'm just, just a human being struggling through this thing just like everyone else. But if a guy like me can find success, anybody can.
Wonderful. Joe, for those in the audience that are listening and they want to connect with you, learn more about you, or buy some books like I'm about to do, how can they go about connecting with you?
Sure. So my moniker, if you will, is the Skid Row CEO, and that comes from a news article that was done on me in the Vancouver province years ago. If you Google Skid Row CEO, you can find my website. I'm on LinkedIn. If you're a person on LinkedIn, you can connect with me there. It's a business social media platform. I'm constantly sharing good content there. If you've got a question, comment, or a conversation or something you want to share with me, there's an email address and ways to contact us on the website or on LinkedIn. Yeah, and if you want copies of the book, or you're interested in, if you're a part of an organization where you do conferences, where you hire speakers, or you've got a school or an AGM or a charity or a community event that you're putting together, I would absolutely love to connect with you if you're looking to bring somebody in to, inspire people and get them to see the world in a different way. That's what I love to do.
Perfect. Joe, again, thank you so much for the work you do and for coming on to the Impact Farming Show and sharing your message. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure as well. And you in the audience, thank you for tuning in. If you love this episode as much as I did, and hopefully got the goosebumps that I have, like it, share it, and get it out there so other farmers can hear this great message of hope in their time where they need that spark. So thank you guys. Tune in next week. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.
Hi guys, Tracy here. Thank you so much for tuning into the Impact Farming Show brought to you by Farm Marketer. I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did. Don't forget to check out the show notes for today's episode and make sure to sign up so that you are the first to know when a new episode is released. I look forward to chatting with you guys soon. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.